Hemi, thanks for taking the time to talk with me today. I know Mental Health Week is coming up on the 15th of this month, and you and I, over the last 4 or 5 years of knowing one another and working together, have had lots of conversations about mental health. I know it's something that's really dear to both, close to us and near and dear to both of our hearts. Do you want to talk through your journey as far as mental well-being is concerned?
Yeah, great to have this chat, Matt. I think you were one of the ones, I think professionally in my time in recruitment, which is over 10 years, that actually made it comfortable to talk about, which is rare, right? In a recruitment type industry or even many industries. But for me, I think it started more when I was younger and more with, I think with a lot of people that I've spoke to, it's either loss or some kind of trauma that has happened. And for me, it was my dad dying when I was young. And then later on, starting to understand I am suffering from mental health, because at that time I didn't really understand it. I think when we were coming up, I don't want to reveal our age, but maybe it was a bit more of a taboo back then, and mental health and depression was deemed as you being either lazy or lethargic or just like you need to snap out of it. And I think it was only when I saw a specialist I started to really understand that I am suffering from mental health. There was nothing to be ashamed of. And that's where I think for the last 10 years, I've just been on this journey on how to improve it, because I think every day you think you've got it under control, but then one day you.
Yeah.
So I think for me, the last 3 years, or I would say 2 years, I've taken it a lot more serious in terms of health, how to cope with it, speaking to specialists, and just trying to really understand the human brain, which to this day, I don't think any scientist or any doctor fully understand. But for me, in recruitment, it started with you. And I suppose my question to you is probably the same. Like for you, you were someone who actually made it acceptable for us to come out and share our emotions as peers, as colleagues, and not feel ashamed or feel like someone's going to judge us. Like for you, where did it start, and how did you get to that point where you were so open with sharing your experiences?
When I was at MA, I knew it was something that was important, and I knew it was something we needed to be doing. And I knew that, and what's interesting is that we obviously talked about it quite a lot during COVID, but I'd forgotten that we'd actually done quite a bit of work prior to COVID around mental health and getting people talking about it. And I think I understood its value. I knew it was important. And I was talking about it in the workplace, and I was driving that agenda in the workplace because I knew it was the right thing to do. But I only really experienced poor mental health myself in the last 2 years. And that was coming out of COVID when my brother died, and that started it, I think. And not necessarily being able to cope with that, necessarily being able to talk about it. And it's interesting that you say that loss for you was the trigger of that journey and the start of that journey, because I feel like it was for me as well. But it's not just loss. And what I find interesting is that, I was made redundant, as you know, last year. I didn't take it well. I didn't react very well to it at all. And grieving that loss of my career and my status that was attached to that career, because for men, so much of our status is attached to our jobs and our careers. And grieving that loss compounded these feelings of loss that I was kind of suppressing around my brother dying. And it meant that Christmas last year, I had a moment where I'm stood in the kitchen going, you're this far away from some sort of breakdown, and you need to deal with this, and you need to be dealing with these emotions and talking about these emotions. And it took that for me to really understand its import, because up until that point, I knew that it was something that was important, and I knew it was something we needed to be talking about, but I didn't feel it for myself.
I hope you don't mind me saying it, because I remember when your brother sadly passed and you were literally working, I think a day later, and we were on a call, and you told me, it's one of those moments, right, where you shouldn't be in work and you know that person shouldn't be there, but you're the type of personality that I think, like me, just tried to put it to the back. But there's only so much that we can suppress it. A doctor once explained it to me. They were like, something in your life you're going to try and suppress, but then there'll be an accumulation of events that will spark everything, and then it will just hit all at once. And it's accumulation of just everything coming together at once, and your brain just can't cope. And it just basically collapses with all the stuff, and it triggers all the rest of the stuff that you didn't think about for years. And
Like, I've been talking about that analogy of the bucket at work at MA, And I
Yeah.
the analogy of the bucket and the fact that, you know, there's water in the bucket and there's a little tap on the side that allows that water out. And as more stress goes into the top of the bucket, it's in danger of overflowing. And sometimes you need extra taps to help you. So that might be doing exercise or yoga or meditation that you wouldn't ordinarily do, or developing new routines to help you get some of that stress out of the bucket quicker. And I talked about a great game about that. And I talked about that all the time. That's my analogy that I used. And I'd stolen it blatantly from when I'd been trained on mental health and wellbeing previously. And yet it took my bucket overflowing to make me go, oh God, yeah, I'm clearly struggling here and I needed more taps on the bucket. And it took me getting to breaking point to really understand it and realize it.
I think we're great at masking your personality. Like, for people who don't know you and you know me, quite exuberant. We're people who, yes, when we're going through downtime, we probably try and hide it and not show that vulnerability. But I think that for me, it was just that comedy, right? Comedy was an easy way just to crack jokes and to mask all that emotion. So people just think that you're always happy-go-lucky. Like in recruitment, I come into the office sometimes and they're like, "Oh, you're always smiling," and it's like, yes, but we're human and we're all going to face things. So I think for me, it was more the masking and the fact that you were in a leadership role, I'm in a managerial role, and I think that also plays in the back of your mind. You're like, if someone sees me in a negative state, is that going to question them on my ability to do my job and to lead others? And you're in such an important role where you're head of HR, people and learning development. People go to you for that support function, right? So again, to you, how did you play that? Like, was it something that you could openly just come out about? Or
I think to be fair to David, I think he was really good at allowing me the space to say, I'm not okay. And, you know, I think I took a week off when Ben died. He was really good. He was like, take as long as you need. And I took a week, and then I'm speaking to you on the phone and telling you what's happened. And it's clear that I should have taken longer, right? But I think if I'd asked for longer, I think he would have absolutely supported it. He would always been really supportive of that. And I think I was able to confide in him and tell him what was going on with me. But I think you're absolutely right. I felt like I had to wear a mask. And what's interesting is that role, and I know you play this role as well. We're main breadwinner, we're the support for our parents, for our mothers, we're the support for our families, we're the support for our friends. And quite often admitting that you actually need help is something that we don't feel we're in, that we don't have the luxury of.
yeah, 100%, because again, when you're in a position where you're supporting others and you're the person that they go to as that strength and that support function, it's only until you look around. And also, I think we have a problem, and a lot of people in mental health that I've met have a problem asking for help.
Yeah.
I don't know, again, whether that's pride, I don't know whether that's ego or fear that someone's going to judge us, but we struggle ourselves going to someone and saying, I need help. The one thing I was going to ask you as well, Matt, like, you've now been in organizations from, you know, large organizations, you've worked overseas, you're now in a position where you're helping companies and going into different organizations. What do you think employers can genuinely do? Because we talk about mental health, and employers are now seeing that it's, I wouldn't say a trend, but something that people care about, right? Employees care about that. So what do you see now that you're working with different businesses, different companies, in terms of mental health? Have we made progress?
I think we have made progress. Not necessarily actually doing stuff about it, but certainly about having the conversation and it being on the radar. And you know, you talk about it being a trend. I think that COVID made us much more aware of our individual mental health and mental well-being, made people start to talk about it, made people recognize it, made organizations and institutions start to talk about it too. And so it's kind of trending off the back of COVID, I guess. And I look at some of the clients that I'm working with now. There's one client I work with, they're 60 people strong. They have 4 mental health for first aiders in their business. 4. I know when I was at MA, we did the same, right? We got budget for 4 mental health first aiders across 100 people. That's brilliant. That's amazing. Recommendations are get 1 and then 1 for every 50 people on top of that. right? So for a business of 50, 60 people, you should have 2 max. And that's best practice. And this organization's got 4. They're doing really, really well. I went in their business the other day and we were joking about the fact that the posters are in the toilets and therefore their faces are in the posters in the bathrooms of get ready to talk about your mental health. Feel free to talk about your mental health. Here are your mental health first aiders. Like really publicly, visibly talking about the fact that we've made a commitment to this and we want people to use it. And I asked them, you know, are people actually using your mental health first aiders? And they said, yes, they are. And I said, okay, to what level? And they're like, oh, we don't really know. We've kept that quite private. And I think for them, it's about learning to quantify its usage, right? So saying, okay, even if they're just a record of the number of calls that they get or the number of people that they speak to, just so you're able to quantify it and say, this is the impact it's having on my business as far as usage is concerned. And then looking at how it's had a positive impact on things like engagement or whatever, and doing that through your diversity, your engagement surveys. But that's a really good example of something that's being done in one of my clients. And even then, I don't think it's necessarily world leading as far as mental health is concerned. You know,
but people are reciprocating, right, and actually taking up, because that's the thing. Like
they're taking up on it. But I think for a lot of organizations, particularly those smaller organizations, they don't know what to do. They don't know that mental health first aiders are something they can access, and they don't know that talking about it is important. We did that men's forum, which I felt.
I was going to say, like, remember when we started it, and the shock that we both had, or I had, with the response.
And I think we struggled, right? So we've ran it and we've had a conversation, and it was a great thing to do. But then we're like, okay, what next? And how do we keep momentum going? And what are we supposed to be talking about? And how do we keep this real for people? I did a similar thing for a group of peers, some friends of mine, in January this year, because I'd recognized that my own mental health was struggling, and I committed to doing a certain number of things. So I was going to do some mindfulness, and I was going to practice mindfulness. I was going to do some meditation. I was going to take regular exercise as a means of committing to helping my own mental health. And I decided to pull a group of friends together and just threw it out on Facebook and said, anybody interested, let me know. And I think I had maybe 5 or 6 people, and we met once. And again, it's because I think with all the best intentions in the world, organizations, groups of people come together, but keeping that momentum going and knowing what they want to be talking about and how it can help. I think a lot of us are lost.
Do you think it's hard for leaders and ones that you've worked with now, because you work with a diverse level of companies, all people from different backgrounds? Do you think it starts with the top down and it depends on the person at the top? Because it's a hard conversation still to have for many, right? Like some people still find it a difficult thing to bring up, especially if they've not dealt with mental health themselves.
I think it takes the leadership in an organization to be committed to it and to be visibly committed to it and to be, you know, quite high profile in the way that they commit to it. So I remember an organization I was in a couple of years ago, the job I had before MA, and we brought somebody in to give us a talk about mental health and wellbeing. And so many people in the business turned up to that, and senior people in the business turned up physically, spent an hour and a half in this room over lunch, an hour listening to the speech, and then half an hour afterwards mingling and talking afterwards. And there was this real public, visible commitment to this is important and we need to be here and we're going to be here for it. And I felt like that was a way of signaling A, its level of importance, and B, that we all had a part to play in it, which was good.
Yep.
So I think that can help. But I think also, I don't think you're going to ever really break this cycle of fear of vulnerability around this until the senior leadership in an organization are hands up saying, this is where I struggle and these are the problems that I face. And I think when you get some of that happening, that's when you start to see the real magic happening in an organization. And unfortunately, I think there still is major stigma, particularly for men, talking about mental health and well-being, but I think for women as well in a different way.
You know, the words, when you think mental health and leadership, the words that I think come to some people's mind who are maybe not in tune with mental health is like unstable, emotional, sporadic, like basically like off the chart. They're going to basically react with emotion. I think for me though, and this is where, again, going back to the forum that we put together when you were here, if you have leaders that join, for me, it makes it, then you look around and everyone else is like, oh, he's talking about it, then I must be all right to talk about it. And then they see people like you and me, who they think we're like managers and people at a senior level. That gives them the platform then to actually just open up and express and realize that they're allowed to without being judged.
You
And
know,
that's where I think leaders have to be in those rooms, at least just to show other people that it's okay not to be okay
yeah,
sometimes.
absolutely, absolutely. But even then, you know, outside of the workplace, like this group that I put together for my friends and stuff, I had a very close friend of mine say, I've really struggled with my mental health historically. I've had a history of depression, which threw me because A, to look at him, I would never have guessed, and B, he'd never mentioned it, and we're quite close. And he said, you know, I'd love to join the group, but I just don't know if I'm prepared to be out about it. And I think that even amongst a group of friends, there's that you've got to recognize that it's a challenge for people to talk about it, that it's not okay. There's still a stigma associated with it. We're supposed to be okay. We're supposed to be buttoned up, professional, corporate. We're supposed to have our shit together. And
do you find telling your nearest and dearest the hardest thing? For me, it was like, for me to tell, you know, like my mum, for example, I remember when she took me to the doctor and she was there, and I was just, it's like you're ashamed and you don't want them to see you in that moment of weakness. But for you, is it the same? Was it hard coming out to people like Joel and just like your friends?
Like Joel, so Joel's my husband, for anybody listening. Joel was amazing. Oh my God, was just so amazing. And I don't think I would actually be here today without him. But telling my mum, knowing that my mum just has this general, she's a typical mum, right? She wants the best for her kids and she worries.
Want to see you happy.
Yeah, and she worries, right? She does. I don't want to make her worry. I don't want to give her anything else to worry about. Like, she's already lost one son. Turning around and telling her that her son's been to a really dark place over Christmas and wasn't doing very well. That's the last thing she needs to hear, right? So it just means that I'm even less inclined. And when I did tell her, you know, it was a good 3 or 4 months afterwards, and it was, I was in a really dark place at Christmas. I'm much better right now, so I'm okay telling you. But it was not good. And you could still see, even then, even though I'm saying to her, I'm fine now, I'm really good actually, that she was still really filled with the dreads at this idea that I'd been in a dark place. And she'd not necessarily been able to prevent it, let alone help in the moment.
Do you think she saw anything though, Matt? Like Joel must have seen it.
Joel,
the one thing that I was going to say, like we can hide it as much as you want, but the people that live with you and see you, they start to. I also think people in workplaces read when someone's not truly themselves. I think we just choose, or some choose to ignore it because we're so wrapped up in our own day to day, and we're quite selfish now as people, right? In this world that we live in. So
people in the workplace see you more regularly, more frequently, more consistently, and therefore will see when there's a pattern. And actually, you've been wearing a mask for a couple of days, even on a subconscious level, right? Something's been off the last few days. I can see it. I can feel it. What's going on? This has now been 2 weeks, 3 weeks. They can sense that. Whereas I think amongst your friendship group, you see them less often. It's more sporadic. It might be every second weekend that I see certain friends or whatever, or maybe every month or whatever. And therefore, that mask goes on, and it's harder amongst friends. Maybe the opportunity to talk about it is in the workplace because we spend more time with our colleagues.
How did you get to the point, Matt? Like, probably a good way to go to the close, but when you obviously got made redundant with the MA, at that time you had so much going on. How did you get the strength, or to the point mentally where you started your own company in a time where people don't have the, I wouldn't say the bravery, or maybe like there's that fear factor that tells them that they can't do it. But how did you get to that point? Just that, because there's people watching, right, who hate their jobs, that is a part of their mental health. They don't want to leave because they feel that they can't, or they just don't have it in them, or that confidence. Like, you obviously at that point had a choice to make. You either go to another company, do the same thing you've been doing for the last 10, 20 years, 30 years of your career, or you start something brand new, which is risk heavy,
Do you know
takes
what?
a lot of time.
I've got a great positive story about that. I really don't. So I was made redundant, and being made redundant in the June, July, and in the middle of that process, Joel lost his job. And I know that my processes, usually if I start from scratch, take anywhere, I can be out of work for 6 months before I find something else. And Joel easily for 2 or 3. And I knew that if I didn't get my hustle on, we would quite literally be on the street within 2 or 3 months. Thankfully, some friends helped us, but realistically, it was a case of you need to get your hustle on, you need to start earning straight away. And thankfully, I was able to lean into ACL and what I do now, which is a combination of diversity, inclusion, and leadership consulting and training to smaller organizations. And I was really lucky that I was able to lean into that experience and utilize that experience and utilize my network. If there was a learn that came from it that I want people to take away, it's that for that first 3 or 4 months, so from the August, September, October, November, I just had my hustle on and I just did it. There was no option to take a breather. There was no option to sit around and think. There was no option to wallow in anything. It was, you need to get your hustle on because you've got rent to pay. Otherwise, you could quite possibly end up out on the street within a couple of months. And so I just did it. And it was the December when I was able to stop and like inhale this massive lungful of breath. And that's when the stress hit me. And that's when I lost it. And I think I didn't realize at the time the damage that I was doing to myself, that actually while I was running 100 miles an hour, I needed support. I needed to be doing meditative piece or yoga or exercise or whatever, or just talking about the stress. I wasn't even talking to people about the stress. I knew that Joel was just as stressed as I was, and therefore I wasn't going to talk to him about how I was feeling. And he didn't talk to me either. And we didn't talk to our parents because our parents would have freaked out at the idea that we were freaking out. We couldn't talk to our friends because it's even harder, as we've discussed, to talk to your friends than it can be to talk to colleagues. And colleagues that I would have talked to were going through the same thing themselves. So ultimately, I just head down, bum up, did it. And yeah, I made it work. And yeah, we were okay. And when it came to December, that's when the wheels fell off the bus. So I think that the message, if there is a learn from what happened, it's not amazing, you can do anything. We're all humans. We've all got capability for certain things, etc., right? It is what it is. My message is make sure that while you are performing, when you are working your hardest, when you are grafting, when you've got your hustle on, make sure that you're looking after your mental well-being. Make sure that you are putting that in as one of the fundamental building blocks to your day job. So, you know, we talk about BD, business development, role, and you have to do a bit of business development every single week, and you can't take your foot off the gas on that, otherwise your pipeline dies, right? I feel like looking after your mental health and mental well-being is a similar thing. It doesn't matter whether I'm flying and everything's amazing. I need to be doing 1 hour to 2 hours a week of something that supports my mental health and mental well-being, so that when the wheels fall off the bus, I'm fine. So that I'm prepped when I need to be. Because I think I've not done that. That's the learn for me, is that I've not looked after my mental health and well-being.
You just keep going and going until you burn out, right? Until you get to that point where just boom.
Yeah.
And then suicide is one of the biggest killers. I wanted to ask you this to end it. I lost someone who was a family friend recently, who was only 20, in his early 20s, to suicide. It's still like I'm seeing it more and more, and it's sad because we come to a time now where me and you can even talk about this, put it on social media, which is great, but kids are still killing themselves. Like young men, you know, are still literally killing themselves. Like, I know it's hard because we're at a different time in our life, but is there anything that you, from your experiences, can say to these people? Even if just one person's watching who's in their early 20s and is thinking like, that's it, I don't want to live anymore. Is there anything that they can do?
We've talked about this today. We've talked about this before, how hard it is to talk, to ask for help. And that I might not be able to ask my peers, I might not be able to ask my partner, my family, etc. There are professional organizations out there that can help you. If that's calling Samaritans and having somebody talk to you and give you guidance and advice around what your next steps might be on how to find help and more permanent help, let that be it. I think for me, I didn't do that, and I really wish that I had done that. And I think I might not have let it get to such a dark place if I'd thought for that. I would say, if you can't ask people around you, if you can't ask your friends and family for help, call Samaritans, call that professional charity and get them to give you that moment's reprieve, so that you can actually then think about what your next steps can be and how you can get better help for yourself. Ultimately, it's way easier to talk to a stranger on the end of the phone without any judgment, without any need to worry about what they're thinking, because when I hang up the phone, they'll never hear from me again. It's way easier to have that conversation with that kind of person than it is to turn to my partner and say, I'm really struggling right now, because that requires me to take the mask off. And invariably, we wear a mask with every single interaction, right? We wear a mask with every single person. Who am I to my husband? Who am I to my mum? Who am I to my best friend? Right? They're different each time. And it requires me to take that mask off and be truly vulnerable. And that can be really hard when you're in the weeds of it, when you're in the thick of it. Whereas actually doing that with a stranger, I think, would be easier. We've talked about how the work we did at MA together created an environment where people felt better talking about it. I've talked about the personal stuff today and what I think individuals can do to help themselves. What do you think companies can do to help their employees?
Wellness days. So if you think about stuff that's tangible, something that I introduced with our team was like wellness days. So once every quarter, for them to at least have a half a day where they can focus on their well-being, and then actually send, like, whether it's in the WhatsApp group, email, like what they've done. So some people chose gardening, some people go to gym, some people yoga. I've got people in my team who like to cycle. So again, I think wellness days is great. I think having leaders that are well equipped and trained, like you gave us at the beginning. So having people coming in and doing sessions and actually talking about the different stages of mental health. Because when we had that session where you brought someone in externally over 4 years ago, that was just before I went through a bit of my episode and going through that down phase. But having that session helped me understand the stages of mental health, because it's different, right? We all suffer from different things, traumas, addictions, whatever it is. I think leadership, having more of an open conversation and dialogue to make it comfortable for the rest of the organization and people at every level to have that discussion, right? And just be able to speak. And I think also, if companies really value mental health, they'll know that when people are performing, it makes them a bigger ROI anyway. Like if someone's in a happy place and a happy mental state, they are going to perform better. It's proven. Happy people sell, or whatever industry you're in. So I think that people need to invest as a business, whether that's what you did with bringing people in externally, whether that's even having 1 or 2 days a year off site and having people come together and doing something for the environment, or just helping a charity, like just not thinking about your own stuff and work. Sometimes when we talk about work, again, I think for both of us, we can admit that it got to a certain point sometimes where it consumes you, right? It's literally everything you talk about, whether it's good, bad. You meet your friends out of work. What do you talk about? Work. So there needs to be a little bit of like, let's not, if we go out as colleagues, let's not talk about work and let's just talk about something different, right? Like, look, in our industry maybe 10 years ago, which changed a bit now, it used to be like, let's go out, let's have a drink. That drink would be, let's get smashed. I think now it's like, okay, like, what can we do that is still fun, but incorporates not just us drinking ourselves to oblivion, which just buries and suppresses depression. From your side, Matt, like now you're working with a variety of companies. What could you offer in support? And also I mean, we've touched on it, but is there anything that you could go in tomorrow to a business that has people suffering from mental health, their performance is down? What would be your point of action, your point of call?
I would be looking for leaders to acknowledge it, talk about their own experiences around mental health, and challenges around managing their own mental well-being. Because I think that corporate vulnerability at the top is really important. So an organization, leaders being able to say, do you know what, we all struggle with this. It's not just these people here. I think that's really important. The mental health first aiders, I think, is a really good thing and a really easy thing to do to get some people trained up within your organization. And then choosing an activity, whether it's, okay, we're going to do, as you say, the Wellbeing days, or we're going to pull people off site, or we're going to get somebody in for training. I think that needs to happen, and it needs to happen consistently. I think if I take the learns from us at MA, we did a great job of doing that initially, but then with the freaking out around COVID in that next year of COVID, the first year of COVID, we dropped the ball.
Distant memory at that point, right?
Yeah. and then picked it up again later on once we've got time to regroup. And the challenge is that when we need it most is in times of crisis, right? So we do the work in the lead up to, and then in that time of crisis, we need to keep consistently beating that drum, whether that's making sure that we're still doing the wellbeing days, or we're still talking about the challenges we're facing, or we're still being supportive of people's needs, or we're still getting people in to talk. Whatever it needs to look like, just beat that drum consistently. Don't allow it to be a one-off event.
Even if they're in a place where they don't know where to start, reaching out to someone like yourself, having someone like Matt, or even just speaking to someone who's done it for other businesses can help you. And then after that, you're on your way.
It starts with that conversation. So I'm always there for a chat and a coffee around ideas, particularly around this kind of thing, because it's, as I say, it's quite close to my heart. So I'm definitely up for that.
No, Matt, I appreciate it, mate. Look, honestly, like, it's been a great conversation. It's, the fact that you brought us together is great, and I think it's hopefully going to help some people, and it'll be great to see you soon, Matt, and mate, your journey and what you're doing right now. It's good to see. So I look forward to celebrating with you in London.
Yeah, definitely. Take care. Thanks for talking.
Appreciate it, mate.